We can't have investors asking questions about where Nathan came from, my daughter-in-law whispered as she removed the last photograph of me from the hallway wall. I stood at the top of the marble staircase holding my overnight bag, staring at the empty space where a picture of my son and me used to hang. Nathan had been 8 years old in that photo, grinning through missing front teeth while I held him close outside our little rental home in Dayton, Ohio. I remembered taking that picture with a disposable camera after working a double shift at the diner. Back then we didn't have much, but we had each other. Now the frame was gone. Every frame was gone. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and let me know where you're watching from, because what happened inside my son's mansion that weekend changed the way I looked at family forever. The house smelled like fresh lilies and expensive candle wax when I stepped inside. Nathan's mansion sat high above the Connecticut shoreline. All glass walls and imported stone floors polished so brightly, I could see my reflection beneath my shoes. A valet had opened my car door before I even touched the handle. 2 women in black dresses hurried through the foyer carrying silver trays of champagne glasses. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a piano playing softly through hidden speakers. Everything about the house felt carefully designed to impress people with money. But the first thing I noticed wasn't the chandelier hanging over the entryway or the 20-foot ceilings. It was the silence where my family used to be. The hallway leading toward Nathan's office had once been lined with childhood photographs. I remembered seeing them during Christmas 2 years earlier. Nathan at Little League games. Nathan wearing a paper graduation cap in kindergarten. Nathan sitting beside me at a tiny kitchen table doing homework while I folded laundry nearby. Those pictures had always made me feel like maybe all the sacrifices had mattered. But now the walls looked strangely bare. The silver frames still hung perfectly straight beneath warm recessed lighting, but inside them were new photographs. Nathan shaking hands with investors. Nathan on magazine covers. Nathan standing beside luxury cars and smiling in front of buildings his company had developed. It looked less like a family home and more like a showroom for success. Evelyn. Vanessa's voice floated toward me before I saw her. She walked down the hallway wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her blonde hair was pinned neatly behind one ear, and her smile appeared polished enough for television. You made good time from Ohio. I nodded and adjusted the strap of my purse. Traffic wasn't too bad once I got off the interstate. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the empty walls before settling back on me. Nathan's upstairs finishing preparations for tonight, she said smoothly. The investors are arriving at 7 sharp, and everything needs to look perfect. I glanced again at the missing photographs. I noticed you redecorated. Vanessa hesitated for half a second. Barely noticeable. But enough. Oh, we just wanted the house to feel more refined for the event, she replied. You know how these people are. Then she stepped closer and lowered her voice. And Evelyn, tonight, if anyone asks about Nathan's childhood, it's probably best not to bring up the trailer park or your diner jobs. Investors like stability, legacy, certain backgrounds. She said it gently, politely, like she was offering helpful advice instead of erasing 30 years of my life. I looked back at the empty space on the wall where our photograph used to be, and for the first time in my 68 years, I realized my son wasn't ashamed of being poor. He was ashamed of me. I stood alone in the upstairs guest room for almost 10 minutes after Vanessa left, listening to the faint sound of workers preparing for the party below. Somewhere downstairs, glasses clinked together softly. Doors opened and closed. A catering manager gave instructions in a rushed whisper. The entire house moved with the nervous energy of people trying very hard to impress strangers. But inside that room, everything felt painfully still. I slowly placed my suitcase on the edge of the king-sized bed and looked around. The room was larger than my first apartment with Nathan's father. Cream-colored walls. A fireplace made from white stone. Fresh orchids arranged beside the window overlooking Long Island Sound. The kind of room magazines call elegant. Yet somehow it felt colder than the tiny trailer where I raised my son during the hardest years of our lives. I sat down carefully and folded my hands in my lap, trying to steady the ache building in my chest. Vanessa's words kept replaying in my mind. Investors like stability, legacy, certain backgrounds. I knew exactly what she meant. She meant people like me did not belong in houses like this. She meant my life embarrassed them. I looked toward the closet where she had already hung a beige silk dress for me to wear tonight. A small note rested on top of the shoebox beneath it. Neutral colors photograph best. I stared at the handwriting for several seconds before quietly folding the note in half and slipping it into my purse. Then I walked downstairs. The mansion looked even more artificial at twilight. Every lamp had been turned on before the sun fully disappeared, bathing the rooms in a warm golden glow that felt staged somehow, like a furniture showroom pretending to be a home. Fresh flowers covered nearly every table. White roses floated in crystal bowls. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Men in dark suits adjusted serving trays while women arranged tiny appetizers with tweezers. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. Nathan stood near the wine bar speaking with two event coordinators when I first saw him. For a moment my heart softened the way it always did when I looked at my son. He still had the same deep blue eyes he had as a little boy. The same slight crease between his eyebrows whenever he concentrated. I remembered those eyes looking up at me across a kitchen table, while I helped him practice spelling words after midnight because I had worked late again. I remembered him sleeping in the passenger seat, while I drove through snowstorms to my second cleaning job. Back then, Nathan used to tell everyone his mother was the strongest woman in Ohio. Tonight he barely looked at me. "Mom," he said quickly, checking his watch, before giving me a brief hug. "Glad you made it." His cologne smelled expensive and unfamiliar. "The house looks beautiful," I said softly. "Thanks." He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Big night tonight. Some really important people are coming." Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared beside him holding a tablet in one hand. "Nathan, the Whitmore group confirmed they are 15 minutes away." At the mention of the name, several staff members immediately moved faster. Even I could feel the tension shift inside the room. Nathan nodded sharply. Then his eyes landed on my sweater. Just for a second, but I noticed. "Mom," he said carefully, "did Vanessa leave the dress upstairs for you?" There was no anger in his voice. No cruelty. Somehow that made it worse. It sounded rehearsed. Polished. Like he was speaking to a problem that needed managing before guests arrived. I looked at my son standing beneath a $20,000 chandelier in a house built from money and ambition, and suddenly I saw something I had refused to see for years. Nathan had not simply become successful. He had become someone who believed love should look expensive before it deserved to be seen. I changed into the beige silk dress because I did not want to create problems before the guests arrived. The fabric felt soft against my skin, but the color drained me completely. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My silver hair looked dull beneath the bright vanity lights. The dress blended into my pale skin so thoroughly that I almost disappeared inside it. Maybe that was the point. Downstairs, the party had already begun by the time I returned. Expensive laughter floated through the house in careful bursts. Men in tailored suits stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows discussing markets and development projects, while women wearing diamonds the size of marbles balanced champagne flutes between manicured fingers. Every conversation sounded polished, controlled. Nobody spoke too loudly. Nobody looked uncomfortable. Even the air inside the mansion felt filtered somehow, free from anything messy or real. Vanessa spotted me immediately and crossed the room with a smile that never quite touched her eyes. "Perfect," she said softly, adjusting the sleeve of my dress as though I were part of the furniture arrangement. "Just stay relaxed tonight. Most of these people are interested in Nathan's new coastal project." I nodded politely. "I understand. And if anyone asks about family," she added carefully, "keep things simple. Nathan has worked very hard to build a certain reputation." A reputation. I almost smiled at the phrase. 35 years ago, Nathan's reputation consisted of being the little boy whose mother brought leftover diner pie home wrapped in napkins because groceries were expensive that week. Back then, nobody cared where we came from because everyone around us came from somewhere difficult too. But this world was different. Here, struggle only sounded impressive after success polished it into a story. Near the grand staircase, Nathan stood speaking with an older couple beside a massive architectural model displayed beneath glass. He looked comfortable there. Confident. Like he had spent his entire life surrounded by wealth instead of fluorescent laundromats and rusted trailer steps. I watched him laugh at something one of the investors said, and suddenly I remembered another night nearly 20 years earlier. Nathan had been 16 and exhausted after basketball practice. The radiator inside our trailer stopped working during January, and the temperature dropped below freezing overnight. I had wrapped towels along the windows to keep the cold air out while heating canned soup on a portable burner because the stove had broken again. Nathan sat at the tiny kitchen table wearing 2 sweatshirts while finishing homework under weak yellow light. "One day I am buying you a huge house," he told me suddenly. "A real one. With heat that actually works." I laughed back then because his certainty sounded so sweet coming from a tired teenager. But he looked at me seriously and said, "I mean it, Mom. Everybody is going to know how hard you worked for me." Standing inside his mansion now, I realized everybody knew about Nathan's success. They just were not allowed to know about me. A waiter passed carrying trays of crab cakes and tiny glasses filled with shrimp cocktail. Somewhere near the piano, someone complimented the imported marble flooring. Another investor praised Nathan's discipline and vision. The words repeated around the room all evening. Vision. Excellence. Legacy. Nobody mentioned sacrifice. Nobody mentioned loneliness. Nobody mentioned the woman who cleaned motel bathrooms for $12 an hour, while her son studied business textbooks at the public library, because they could not afford internet service at home. Then the front doors opened again, and the entire energy inside the mansion shifted. Conversations softened instantly. Heads turned toward the entryway. Vanessa straightened her posture. Nathan adjusted his suit jacket. An older woman stepped inside wearing a navy cashmere coat and carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed attention to feel important. Her silver hair framed a sharp, intelligent face, and the room seemed to reorganize itself around her presence without her saying a single word. Vanessa leaned toward me and whispered, "That is Margaret Whitmore." I looked at the woman standing beneath the chandelier while snowflakes melted softly against the shoulders of her coat, and something about her expression felt strangely familiar. Margaret Whitmore removed her gloves slowly as one of the servers offered her champagne. Unlike the other guests, she did not immediately begin talking. She simply stood there for a moment, studying the room with calm gray eyes that missed nothing. Nathan crossed the marble floor quickly to greet her, his entire posture shifting the closer he got. I had seen that look before when he was younger. It was the expression he wore whenever he desperately wanted approval from someone he admired. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said warmly, extending his hand. "It is an honor to finally have you here." Margaret smiled politely but briefly. "You have a beautiful home, Nathan." Her voice carried the kind of confidence that did not need volume. Nathan began guiding her through the foyer while Vanessa floated beside them gracefully, explaining details about the property, the architecture, the future expansion plans. Everything sounded practiced. Every sentence polished smooth. I stayed near the back of the room, pretending to admire the ocean view beyond the windows while quietly watching them. Something about Margaret felt different from the others. Most of the investors spent the evening trying to impress one another. But Margaret observed people the way experienced doctors study symptoms before making a diagnosis. Twice, I caught her glancing toward me while Nathan spoke. Not rudely, curiously, as though she sensed something inside the room was slightly out of place. About 30 minutes later, dinner was announced. Guests gathered around an enormous dining table decorated with candles and white orchids. Place cards rested neatly on silver chargers. I noticed immediately that my seat sat near the far end of the table between 2 younger associates from Chicago I had never met. Nathan and Vanessa sat beside Margaret near the center beneath the chandelier. It should not have hurt as much as it did. But I remembered all those years when Nathan refused to eat dinner until I sat beside him after work, even if my uniform still smelled like bleach from cleaning motel bathrooms. "You should always sit near family," he used to say when he was little. Funny how success changes the definition of family. During dinner, conversation flowed easily around business projections and luxury developments. Nathan spoke confidently about expansion opportunities in Florida and Arizona, while investors nodded approvingly over plates of sea bass and roasted vegetables. I barely touched my food. Across the table, Margaret remained mostly quiet, listening more than speaking. Then one of the younger men asked Nathan where he had learned such discipline at such a young age. Nathan smiled smoothly. I suppose I always knew I wanted more than the environment I grew up in. The sentence landed softly enough that most people probably missed the meaning behind it. But I felt it immediately. Environment. Not home. Not family. Environment. Like his childhood had been some temporary inconvenience he outgrew. Vanessa laughed lightly beside him. Nathan practically reinvented himself the moment he left Ohio. Several people smiled politely. I lowered my eyes toward my untouched wine glass. And suddenly I was back in Dayton 27 years earlier, standing outside our trailer at 5:30 in the morning while freezing rain soaked through my shoes. Nathan had been accepted into a summer business program in Columbus, but the tuition was almost $800 more than I had saved. I remember selling my wedding ring that afternoon at a pawn shop beside the highway because I could not bear the thought of him losing that opportunity. Nathan cried when he found out. "Mom, you should not have done that." I touched his face and told him something I believed with my entire heart at the time. Nothing I own matters more than your future. Sitting inside his mansion now, listening to strangers praise the man he had become, I quietly wondered whether I had accidentally taught my son that some things could simply be discarded once they no longer fit the life you wanted. After dinner, the guests drifted toward the lower terrace where heaters glowed softly against the cold Atlantic wind. Beyond the glass railings, the dark ocean stretched endlessly beneath the winter sky, calm and distant and impossibly quiet. Servers moved gracefully between small groups carrying trays of espresso and miniature desserts, while low jazz music continued playing from hidden speakers outside. Everything looked elegant enough for a magazine spread. But beneath all the polished beauty, I could feel tension moving quietly through the evening like a current beneath still water. Nathan stood near the outdoor fireplace explaining projected returns to several investors, while Vanessa laughed at exactly the right moments beside him. They looked perfect together. Successful. Controlled. Untouchable. Every now and then Nathan glanced toward Margaret Whitmore, measuring her reactions carefully after each sentence. It became obvious very quickly that her opinion mattered more than everyone else in that house combined. Meanwhile, I remained mostly invisible near the terrace railing, warming my hands around a cup of coffee I had barely touched. I was used to invisibility by then. Mothers like me often become background scenery once their children succeed. We spend decades building someone else's future, only to discover there is no place reserved for us inside it. Still, something about tonight felt different. More deliberate. As though Nathan was not simply overlooking me. He was managing me. Curating me the same way Vanessa arranged flowers or adjusted lighting before guests arrived. Beautiful view, is it not? Margaret's voice startled me gently from beside the railing. I turned and found her standing next to me holding a small porcelain espresso cup between elegant fingers. Up close, her face showed the soft lines of age without apology. There was nothing artificial about her appearance. No desperate attempt to seem younger. Just confidence sharpened by experience. "It really is," I answered quietly. For a moment neither of us spoke. We simply looked out toward the black water below the cliffs. Then Margaret tilted her head slightly. "You are Nathan's mother." It was not a question. I nodded. "Evelyn Carter." Margaret Whitmore. Her eyes rested on me carefully now. "You raised him alone?" The question caught me off guard. "Mostly," I admitted. "His father passed away when Nathan was 12. Margaret looked back toward the party where Nathan continued entertaining investors beneath golden terrace lights. "That explains certain things." I frowned slightly. "What things?" A faint smile touched the corner of her mouth. Ambition built from hunger always looks different than ambition built from comfort. Before I could respond, one of the younger investors interrupted to ask Margaret a question about a hotel acquisition in Miami. She answered politely, but as the conversation continued, I noticed something strange. Margaret barely listened to Nathan's financial projections anymore. Instead, she kept studying him quietly whenever he spoke. Not admiringly, carefully. Almost the way a teacher watches a student repeating memorized answers instead of understanding the lesson itself. About 20 minutes later, I stepped back inside to escape the cold. The mansion felt unusually quiet without the crowd filling every room. I wandered slowly through the hallway again, past the expensive framed magazine covers and staged photographs of success. Something pulled at me then, a feeling I could not fully explain. I stopped beside a narrow service door near the back staircase and noticed it standing slightly open. Beyond it, dim light spilled downward toward the basement level. I hesitated only briefly before walking downstairs. The air changed immediately. Cooler. Dustier. Real. Gone were the polished marble floors and designer candles. Down there smelled faintly of cardboard and old paint. At the bottom of the stairs, rows of storage shelves lined the unfinished basement walls. Holiday decorations. Old furniture. Sealed moving boxes stacked carefully in corners. Then I saw them. Large silver picture frames leaned against one wall beneath a plastic tarp. My heartbeat slowed painfully as I walked closer. One by one, I lifted the covered frames into the light. There I was, holding Nathan at Disney World when he was 9, sitting beside him at his high school graduation, smiling together outside our first tiny apartment after we finally escaped the trailer park. Every photograph they had removed from the mansion upstairs had been hidden down here like something embarrassing that needed to stay out of sight. I sat down slowly on the cold basement floor with one of the framed photographs resting across my lap. Dust clung to the glass in soft gray streaks, dulling the image beneath it. I wiped the surface carefully with the sleeve of my dress until the picture became clear again. Nathan looked about 10 years old in that photograph. He was standing beside me at the county fair holding an oversized stuffed bear. He had won after spending almost an hour trying to knock down milk bottles with baseballs. His smile looked so open back then. So proud. My arm wrapped around his shoulders while sunlight caught the loose strands of my hair blowing across my face. I stared at that picture for a long time. Then I looked around the basement again. Every important memory from our life together had been stacked down there beside unused Christmas decorations and storage bins like objects waiting to be forgotten. I should have cried. Maybe years ago I would have. But something colder settled inside me instead. A strange calmness. The kind that comes when pain finally becomes too familiar to surprise you anymore. Upstairs, faint laughter echoed through the ceiling while expensive glasses clinked together softly. The party continued above me as though none of this mattered. As though hiding an entire person could somehow erase the truth of how a life was built. I carefully placed the photograph beside me and opened another frame. This one showed Nathan on move-in day at Ohio State University. He wore an oversized sweatshirt and looked terrified despite pretending otherwise. I remembered every detail from that day. The drive up Interstate 71 in my old Ford Taurus with the broken air conditioner. The way Nathan kept checking the acceptance letter in his backpack like he still could not believe it was real. I had only $43 left in my checking account after paying his housing deposit. That week I worked 14 straight shifts at the motel because tuition bills were already arriving. I remembered standing alone in a supply closet at work with aching feet, eating crackers from a vending machine because skipping lunch meant saving another $5 for Nathan's books. Back then, every sacrifice felt worth it because I believed we were building something together. Family works that way when love is still honest. One person carries the weight for a while so another can climb higher. But somewhere along the way, Nathan stopped seeing the hands that lifted him. I heard footsteps suddenly above the basement stairs. Quiet at first. Then closer. I stood carefully and placed the photographs back against the wall just as Margaret Whitmore appeared at the bottom of the staircase. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Her eyes moved slowly across the hidden frames surrounding me. I watched understanding settle over her expression almost instantly. "So this is where they put you," she said quietly. The words hit harder than anger would have. I gave a small shrug. Apparently family photographs no longer matched the decor upstairs. Margaret stepped farther into the basement, studying the pictures one by one. There was no pity in her face. Only disappointment. "Your son talks a great deal about vision," she said softly. "But vision without gratitude usually becomes vanity." I looked down at the frame in my hands. Nathan was not always like this. "No," Margaret replied. "People rarely begin this way." For several seconds the basement remained silent except for the distant hum of heating pipes overhead. Then Margaret surprised me by kneeling slightly beside one of the larger photographs leaning against the wall. It showed me and Nathan outside our trailer after his high school graduation. The paint on the trailer looked faded. My diner uniform still hung loosely beneath my coat because I had come straight from work. But Nathan looked happier in that photograph than he had all evening upstairs. Margaret touched the edge of the frame lightly. "You know what the funny thing is?" she said. "Most of the investors upstairs did not build anything meaningful themselves. They inherited comfort. They inherited safety. But real success recognizes sacrifice immediately." I looked at her carefully then. "You grew up poor too." Margaret smiled faintly without looking away from the photograph. "Kentucky coal country. 1-bedroom farmhouse. 6 people." She stood again and straightened her jacket calmly. "The difference is, I never learned to feel ashamed of the people who carried me out of it." Upstairs, I suddenly heard Nathan's voice through the ceiling announcing that he wanted to thank everyone for coming tonight. Margaret glanced toward the sound before turning back to me one last time. "Evelyn," she said quietly, "leave those photographs exactly where they are for now." Then she walked back upstairs alone. When I returned upstairs a few minutes later, the atmosphere inside the mansion had shifted again. Most of the guests had gathered near the grand piano where Nathan stood holding a crystal glass in one hand while soft golden light from the chandeliers reflected across the windows behind him. Conversations quieted gradually as people turned their attention toward him. Vanessa stood nearby smiling proudly, one hand resting lightly against his arm like she was presenting something carefully crafted to the room. Nathan always had a gift for speaking. Even as a child, he knew how to make people listen. I remembered him standing in our tiny church basement at age 13 giving a speech for a school competition, while wearing a thrift store blazer 2 sizes too large. His hands shook the entire time, but his voice never did. Back then, his confidence made me proud. Tonight it made me tired. "I just want to thank all of you for being here," Nathan began smoothly. "This company started with an idea and a willingness to work harder than anyone else in the room." Several investors nodded approvingly. "Everything we are building now is based on discipline, long-term vision, and surrounding yourself with the right people." The sentence lingered strangely in the air. Surrounding yourself with the right people. I noticed Margaret Whitmore standing near the fireplace watching Nathan carefully over the rim of her wine glass. Her expression remained impossible to read. Nathan continued speaking about growth opportunities and future developments along the East Coast while guests listened politely. He sounded convincing. Successful. Certain. But now that I had seen the basement, every polished sentence felt thinner somehow, like expensive wallpaper covering cracks underneath. Then Nathan smiled and lifted his glass slightly. "I learned early that where you come from does not define where you end up." More nods. More approval. Vanessa looked almost relieved beside him. And suddenly Margaret spoke. Calmly. Clearly. "That depends," she said. The room fell silent immediately. Nathan blinked once, surprised by the interruption. Margaret stepped forward slowly, her heels barely making noise against the marble floor. "Sometimes where you come from defines everything," she continued. Nobody moved. Even the server standing near the dining room entrance seemed frozen in place. Margaret turned slightly toward the hallway lined with carefully selected photographs. "I spent the evening admiring the images displayed throughout your home," she said. "Very impressive career milestones. Awards. Magazine covers. Luxury. Developments." Nathan smiled cautiously. "Thank you." Margaret tilted her head. But I noticed something missing. The silence sharpened instantly. Across the room, Vanessa's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Nathan kept smiling, but I saw tension flash briefly across his jaw. Margaret's voice remained perfectly calm. "There are almost no photographs of your family, especially your mother." No one spoke. Somewhere near the back of the room, ice shifted softly inside a glass. Nathan let out a small laugh that sounded rehearsed even to him. "Oh, we recently updated some of the decor." "Did you?" Margaret asked gently. Then she looked directly at him. "Or did you remove the woman who carried your entire life on her back, because she no longer matched the image you wanted investors to see?" The room went completely still. I stood near the staircase holding my breath without realizing it. Nathan glanced toward me for the first time all evening. Really looked at me. Not as a problem to manage. Not as background scenery. Just me. His mother. The woman who once sat beside hospital beds during his childhood asthma attacks because we could not afford private doctors. The woman who skipped meals so he could attend business seminars in college. The woman hidden downstairs beside storage boxes. Vanessa stepped forward quickly. Mrs. Whitmore, I think there has been some misunderstanding. But Margaret raised one hand softly without taking her eyes off Nathan. I built my first company from a folding table inside a rented trailer in Kentucky, she said quietly. Do you know why investors trusted me? Nathan said nothing. Margaret answered her own question. Because I never tried to erase the people who helped me survive before success arrived. No one in the room moved. The ocean beyond the windows looked black beneath the winter sky. Finally, Margaret's gaze shifted toward me standing quietly near the staircase. Evelyn, she said calmly, would you please show them the real foundation this house was built on? For a few seconds, nobody in the room moved. The silence felt so complete that I could hear the soft crackling of the fireplace near the terrace doors. Nathan stood frozen beside the grand piano, still holding his crystal glass, though his fingers had tightened around it enough for his knuckles to pale. Vanessa looked between Margaret and me with the controlled smile of someone trying desperately not to lose control in front of important people. I should have felt nervous standing there with every eye in the mansion suddenly fixed on me. But strangely I did not. Something inside me had settled the moment Margaret spoke aloud what everyone else had politely ignored all evening. The truth no longer belonged only to me. I turned quietly and walked toward the hallway near the back staircase. No one stopped me. Behind me, the room remained completely silent except for the faint sound of the ocean outside the windows. As I descended into the basement again, I thought about all the years I spent teaching Nathan that dignity mattered more than appearances. Apparently some lessons do not survive success. I picked up the first framed photograph carefully, then another, and another. By the time I climbed back upstairs, my arms were full of memories no one upstairs had wanted displayed anymore. The moment I stepped into the living room carrying those photographs, the atmosphere changed instantly. Conversations disappeared completely. One of the younger investors lowered his champagne glass slowly without taking his eyes off the pictures in my hands. I walked toward the fireplace calmly and placed the first frame against the mantel. Nathan at 8 years old missing his front teeth while hugging me outside our old rental house. Then I placed another beside it. Nathan in his graduation gown standing proudly next to me while I wore my diner uniform because I had come straight from work. Then another. Christmas mornings inside our tiny trailer. County fairs. School ceremonies. Birthday cakes baked in cramped kitchens with peeling linoleum floors. Every photograph told the same story. Not wealth. Not status. Survival. I did not say anything at first. I simply kept placing the photographs where everyone could see them. Across the room, Nathan's face had gone completely pale. Mom, he said quietly at last, his voice tight with embarrassment. You do not need to do this. I looked at him calmly while adjusting one of the frames. No, I answered softly. I think I finally do. Vanessa stepped forward quickly. Evelyn, perhaps this is not really the appropriate moment for personal family matters. Margaret Whitmore turned toward her slowly. Actually, she said, it is exactly the appropriate moment. No one interrupted her. Margaret walked toward the fireplace and picked up one of the photographs carefully. It showed 17-year-old Nathan sitting beside me at a tiny kitchen table covered in scholarship applications and fast food receipts. The wallpaper behind us peeled near the ceiling. We both looked exhausted, but happy. Margaret studied the picture quietly before facing the room again. This, she said calmly, is what character looks like before money edits the story. The silence deepened. One of the older investors near the terrace nodded faintly without speaking. Another man stared at Nathan with a completely different expression now. Not admiration. Evaluation. I could see it happening in real time. The room no longer saw Nathan as the polished self-made visionary he had carefully presented all evening. They saw someone willing to bury the people who built him in order to appear more impressive to strangers. Nathan looked around the room helplessly before turning back toward me. I was only trying to keep things professional, he said quietly. The words sounded weak even to him. I folded my hands together and looked at my son for a long moment. Then I said the one thing I think finally broke whatever illusion remained in that mansion that night. Professional people do not hide their mothers in basements, Nathan. No one defended him after that. Not even Vanessa. The party ended less than an hour later, though nobody officially announced it. Conversations never fully recovered after that moment near the fireplace. The polished confidence that had filled the mansion earlier slowly dissolved into awkward handshakes, unfinished drinks, and quiet excuses about early flights and morning meetings. Investors who had once crowded around Nathan discussing expansion plans now spoke to him with careful politeness instead of enthusiasm. Some avoided him altogether. Others left without saying goodbye. I stood near the hallway watching expensive coats disappear through the front doors one by one, while snow drifted softly outside beneath the security lights. The mansion no longer felt warm. It felt exposed, like a stage after the audience finally sees the wires behind the performance. Margaret Whitmore was among the last to leave. Before stepping outside, she paused beside me and touched my hand gently. "You raised a capable man," she said quietly. "Whether he remembers how to become a decent one again is his decision now." I nodded once. "Thank you." Margaret glanced briefly toward Nathan standing alone near the windows at the far end of the room. "Success built on shame never stays stable for very long," she said softly. Then she pulled on her gloves and disappeared into the snowy night. After the last car finally left, silence settled heavily through the house. Real silence this time. No music. No laughter. No performance. Vanessa disappeared upstairs without saying another word. I heard the sharp click of heels against marble floors before a bedroom door closed somewhere in the distance. Nathan remained standing near the terrace windows with both hands in his pockets staring out at the dark ocean. For several minutes neither of us spoke. I slowly walked toward the fireplace where the photographs still rested against the mantel exactly where I had placed them earlier. The room looked different now with those pictures visible again. Smaller somehow. More honest. Nathan finally spoke without turning around. "You embarrassed me tonight." His voice sounded tired instead of angry. I looked down at the photograph of us outside the trailer after his graduation. "No," I answered calmly. "I reminded people where you came from. There is a difference." He rubbed one hand across his face slowly. For the first time all evening, he suddenly looked older to me. Not physically. Spiritually. Like carrying the weight of pretending had exhausted him more than he realized. "You do not understand how this world works," he said quietly. "People judge everything." I smiled faintly at that. "Nathan, I cleaned motel rooms for 22 years. I know exactly how people judge." He finally turned toward me then. His eyes moved toward the photographs lining the mantel. "I was trying to create something bigger than all of that. There is nothing bigger than the people who sacrifice so you could stand in rooms like this," I replied softly. The words seemed to land harder than anything else I had said that night. Nathan looked away again. Outside the windows, snow continued falling silently over the cliffs and ocean below. I picked up my coat from the chair near the staircase and slipped it on slowly. Nathan noticed immediately. "You are leaving?" he asked. "Tonight." "Mom." The word came out smaller this time. Closer to the boy he used to be. I walked toward the front door before stopping briefly beside him. Up close, I could still see traces of the child who once waited awake for me after late shifts because he hated falling asleep before I got home. That boy was not completely gone. Just buried beneath too many years of ambition and fear and performance. I touched his arm gently. "One day," I said quietly, "you are going to understand that being poor never made you small, Nathan, but being ashamed of love will." His eyes lowered immediately after that. He did not try to stop me again. Outside, the cold air smelled clean and sharp against my face as I stepped onto the long stone driveway. Snowflakes settled softly across my coat, while lights from the mansion glowed behind me through the darkness. I climbed into my car and looked back at the house one final time before starting the engine. Through the front windows, I could still see the photographs standing proudly beside the fireplace where everyone could finally see them again. All except one. The only photograph missing now was the newest version